Bootstrap Confidential, the podcast where we talk to successful bootstrappers about the playbook for bootstrapping.
Welcome to Bootstrap Confidential, where this episode I'm delighted to be talking to Victor Cruz, the CEO and founder of VC Innovations. Victor founded VC Innovations just before the pandemic, and we'll come back to that in a bit. But thank you very much for joining us and welcome, Victor.
Thank you, Charles. Lovely to be here. I'm a listener of the podcast, so I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic, fantastic. So as you listen to it, you know that we always get started with the first question, which is the fundamental, raison d'etre that every founder has that makes them jump off the fence. So obviously, you had a strong background in established global players like Terrapin, like Informa, big global events businesses.
Yep.
So what was the moment when you decided, you know what, I'm gonna take the plunge and do this by myself?
All right. Okay. So I guess I'll answer the question in two parts. For me, this concept of running your own business and becoming an entrepreneur, it was something that I came across very early on. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, especially on my mum's side. All her brothers, five brothers,
Wow.
were all, yeah, exactly. So five boys and one young lady. Um, they were all doing some sort of business. Um, so seeing that, uh, it was it was a very kind of striking experience. I understood very early on. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't think I understood what they were doing, but I enjoyed very much um, trying to get to grips with the concept. So I remember one of her brothers, waking up early and with a little file, under his arms. And now I know he was running like a fruit and veg distribution business. But just the kind of the energy that he had, getting up, going, jumping on his van, and I guess nowadays we call it what hustling. I love that idea, and I did see myself doing that. So I've always known that running my own business and doing this thing called entrepreneurship was my destiny. That was definitely on the cards. Um, at the age of 19, I was very lucky. I was lucky enough to join Terrapin as part of the delegate sales team. They were looking for a Brazilian Portuguese speaker to sell on a portfolio called Hedge Funds World Latam.
Okay.
So that was my kind of very first kind of experience in the event space, and I fell in love within week one. Talking to people, collaborating with producers, marketing, traveling, all of that. It suited my personality really, really well. But the entrepreneurship goal and the vision was always there. I guess if you fast track a few years, yeah, you mentioned Informa, GMG events. I had quite a lot of experience working, for some of the best players in the market. I guess what I needed at that point was just an idea, and I had plenty, plenty of concepts, plenty of ecosystem plays, to a point where I found one that I really felt was it was a strong idea. Um, um, and then I guess understanding how I wanted to do things differently, how I wanted to create value for clients in a different manner. That was a big part of my thought process. Throughout my years at DMG and Informa, I developed this concept of generational responsibility. You have a team running a portfolio or perhaps not a team, but the commercial function or a client success function running a portfolio for a couple of years, and then moving on as you do in the
Yeah.
event space. And then those relationships were lost. And I throughout the years, again, I'm probably generalizing a little bit here, but I didn't really see much of that care and that attention and that obsession with value creation, accountability to some extent. So for me, there was a very clear pillar when it came to our mission, our vision, that sheer obsession with value creation. So yeah, entrepreneurship was embedded in my family, so I knew I wanted to do it. I was lucky enough to find what I think is an amazing industry, especially for someone starting to experience the world and corporate life at such a young age, and just having access to industry leaders and different narratives and ecosystem plays. Very lucky to have found the sector. And then thirdly, the idea, and I guess a very clear view as to how I wanted to behave, as a partner, how I wanted to behave as a service provider.
That's
Sorry,
really interesting.
long answer there, Charles. Apologies.
No, but it's really interesting because the last episode I was talking to Mohit Sangar, who has a similar business in Asia and an events-based marketing business not in the financial space, but more in the tech space, but working with governments rather than with B2B. But again, ex-Terrapin, and again, exactly the same problem that he identified, that there was this, as you call it, this generational issue that every couple of years the team would move on or the value would be lost. There was no focus on value creation. There was no focus on a really fantastic client experience. There was, so yeah, just really interesting. And you had a really clear idea as well, like he did. So often when people start businesses now, particularly with everything that's going on in the media, it's like, I want to found a business, I want to be a founder, I'm going to go and get some angel funding or some VC funding, or and they go off down that funding route for however many long it takes, with or without success. You obviously decided to bootstrap the business. Was that a conscious decision? Did you fall into it? Did you build yourself like a financial runway to give yourself as much time as possible before you launched? What was kind of the process there?
Yeah, I think definitely a little bit of ignorance, which it can be, which is it can be a blessing at points.
It
Not
absolutely can.
when you don't know what you don't know. That's I guess it could be a powerful thing. No, I mean I guess I didn't really understand what other options were out there. Um, you know, Privately funded, as you know, life savings essentially. Um, kind of traditional finance wasn't even part of the equation. Like, traditional finance within that layer of the market, I don't think we could even call ourselves an SME then.
Yeah.
We're just kind of a man and a laptop, really, with a few ideas. No, yeah, I guess you could say it was a conscious decisions, but I think it was more like lack of options, really. I think one of the beautiful things about our model is that you can actually get away with, concept selling for
Yeah.
quite a while. Um, and that's what kept us going, really. Um, you know, Prospecting on Sunday afternoons as you do. Um, I realized very quickly that you know, decision makers, as we like to call them, they do quite a lot of planning on Sundays, especially sort of post lunchtime. So that was my kind of magic 3 hour window. Sending bespoke messages on LinkedIn and trying to get some attention from those execs, and it did work. It did work. Um, our most sizable deal within that first year, and I'll mention the name here, came from a large software provider within financial services called Finastra, former
Yeah. Yeah.
Mises. I'm sure you know that. And I remember dropping Martin Herrig a note on LinkedIn at sort of 3 o'clock on Sunday, with something along the lines, Marty, I'm a big fan of Fusion Fabric Cloud, how you bring in talent and tech and financial services, and it aligns very well, with what I'm doing at VC Innovations. And that was on the back of my flagship event, which then was called the FinTech Talents Festival. Now is the FTT FinTech Festival. And he jumped in straight away, and he was like, "Yeah, Victor, I love the sound of this. This is your guy. Go and talk to him. I'm dropping him a message now. He's expecting a note from you." And 2 months later, we had 80 grand landing on the account, which was just like, wow. This is it was kind of a mind blowing amount of money then. So yeah, fully bootstrapped, but relying on that very special aspect of our model, which is a kind of a cash rich model. You're collecting now to delivering 8, 9, 12 months time. So that's essentially what kept us going within the first year. That said, 3 weeks pre-flagship event, my wife was raising a personal loan to pay for kind of last minute suppliers. So yeah, it was a mixture of everything. But yeah, I guess answering your question, conscious, not conscious, it was just pure kind of instinct and
scrabbling around crazily to try
scrabbling
and pay bills.
around.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I remember all the fun of that.
Exactly that.
I have to
Exactly
say,
that.
20 years ago, like when I started my last business, I kind of assumed that you could only get funding if you were inventing some kind of tech business in Silicon Valley, and the rest of the world wasn't even able to partake in this. And as you say, traditional finance, we weren't even a micro SME like you. It was a person with a laptop. Although I learned very quickly on day one never to call people on Monday morning to try and cold call them because they're all busy in the management meetings they've been planning on Sunday afternoon when you'd much more smartly been contacting them. But you mentioned your first event there, and I know that it wasn't long after your first event that the world went into lockdown, which you've got a fledgling business that's just finding its legs. It's an in-person events business, and suddenly the world's in lockdown, which was massively challenging on not just within the business world, in many other ways, but from a business point of view, from a startup point of view, other than the sinking feeling in your stomach, like most of us had when that first occurred, who are running businesses, as well as the health issues. Like, how did you kind of cope with that and roll through that? And did it? Lots of people I speak to were kind of helped in a way because it forced them to like focus on certain things. So was that the case for yourself?
Yeah, so I remember entering the following cycle, the 2020 cycle, with something like a 60% rebook rate, either on site or straight after the event, which, obviously now we aim for something slightly higher, but then for a year one event to secure that level of retention, we were just over the moon, and it was a great feeling. Um, Yes, and then and then COVID happened. I remember Friday, I think it was a Friday, 13th of March, was when I could sort of close the office officially. Within the kind of the week before, I started hearing team members going, saying that they were uncomfortable with commuting, and it was very difficult to understand what was really happening. Um, so my kind of um, immediate kind of instinct was to pivot and think about how we could continue to deliver value to clients.
Yeah.
I guess you know unlike a Terrapin or Informer or a GMG events, VC Innovations, we were extremely dynamic. So so Friday 13th of March, office is shut. I remember telling my wife, this is something unprecedented. So and we had just had my now 5-year-old. He was born in January. So we had a 2-month-old baby in the house with my 4 or 5 year old then, who was about to be homeschooled. So it was all very messy, to say the least. So yeah, I remember telling her, look, I just need to figure this out. I need to lock myself in the office and just just think about this. How do we move on? How do we pivot? How do we come up with a plan that I can sell not only externally to my clients, but how do I sell this internally to people? So I remember vividly bringing everyone on the following Monday, bringing everyone in, and pitching, pitching the business, the virtual delivery, model, which the team was fully behind it. I think the team was fully behind it. I don't think they had much of much of a choice really. I delivered the idea I tried to deliver with a lot of passion and a lot of energy. I made it about us. I made it about our clients. And yeah, 30 minutes in, we were like, right, this is it. Let's push through. Within 2 weeks, we had already launched the first kind of virtual event activation within our space, fintech. So we work extremely quickly. Whilst the incumbent players were still figuring out which virtual platform they were going to use, I was already on a beta contract with Hopin. I'm not sure if you remember Hopin, but it was one of the first players in the space. Went on to raise 250 million pounds, and all of that was happening so fast. But we were like one of the first Hopin adopters. So within 2 weeks, I had a very clear product, which aligned well to some extent with our model as a business around generating demand, buyer intent, that virtual platform and all those lead capture channels really and it's really aligned well with our proposition and our model and how we like to sell. So yeah, 2 weeks on, we had a product. I had convinced pretty much all of our clients to reallocate that rebook investment to an event property that was going to take place in November within that year, to reallocate that investment to a June, July virtual event. So all of a sudden I didn't have to deal with that really heavy operational costs of hosting 2,000 people, 50, 60, 70 exhibitors, feeding everyone and everything that goes with that. All of a sudden we didn't have that. We had a much more cost-effective channel to deliver against those campaigns, and I've managed to bring all of that revenue forwards. So I think within 2020 we probably run, I don't know, between 5 and 10 virtual events.
That's fantastic, and that's so interesting as well, because I mean, you were the pandemic. Like I launched a financial business just before the financial crisis. It doesn't have to be something as dramatic as a financial crisis or a global pandemic, but so often when I'm talking to founders, there's that external event. I mean, it's a Chinese myth that the word for crisis is the symbol danger plus opportunity. It's not a Chinese myth. It's an urban myth that the Chinese word for crisis is danger and opportunity. But it's very true if you're founding a business, and for anybody in the process of founding a business or thinking about founding a business. It doesn't matter if it's the arrival of Gen AI, if it's a new regulatory requirement like GDPR. There are so many things that cause a shock to the market where the incumbents, by definition, cannot react quickly because they have layers and layers of processes and things to move through. And a really small, agile startup can pivot on a dime or spin on the spot, whatever the phrase is, like you did,
Exactly.
and be doing 5 or 6 events, in the first year of the pandemic. That's fantastic. But you mentioned your people. Obviously, you imbued them with the same passion and energy that you had. So when you're building your team as a startup, What sort of people are you looking for? And did you deliberately go, obviously you've got a very strong idea of what the value creation you wanted was for your clients. Did you have a really strong idea of what the culture of the business would be that would enable that, and therefore what sort of people you were looking for? Or was it more of a, grab anyone that's a half interested and run with it because I can't afford to pay what all my competitors are and they're going to have to work longer hours, or somewhere between
Yeah,
the two?
no, exactly. I think how we do how we hire, and how we kind of nurture talent nowadays is completely different to how we did, back in 2019. You're right. I mean, back then was, you know, it felt like a win every time someone accepted an offer. Was every time someone, joined the business. And yeah, sure, we've made tons of them, or tons of errors, tons of mistakes back then. But now, yeah, completely different now. I think for me, I do hire a lot thinking about discipline. I think, if you have discipline, and I've learned about it much later in life. I think if you apply discipline to skills, charisma, background, whatever, um, you're gonna, you have a much bigger chance of succeeding. Um, so nowadays, I do think a lot about discipline. Yeah, back then was, pure, moving fast, breaking things, trying to grow the team, trying to bring people on board, and yeah, it's
There's always that
yeah,
fun bit at the
fun
start when you
times.
send out job offers and then you sit there on the first day they're supposed to arrive going, are they going to turn up, or have they had second thoughts in between accepting the offer and actually arriving on day one?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, when you go like, you coming back tomorrow? Especially for someone like me, I've obviously very passionate, and I've got a somewhat intense personality. So I'm like, go, 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 constantly pushing, constantly looking to optimize, um, constantly coming up with new ideas. And I do appreciate that can be quite a um, sort of a daunting experience for someone that doesn't necessarily,
It's
understand
essential. I
that.
think
Or
it's essential for growing a business, growing any business, but certainly for fast growth. That kind of like intense enthusiasm. I came across a description years ago. I think it was from Ted Turner that leadership was infectious enthusiasm coupled with ruthless pragmatism, and I've always loved that. But the infectious enthusiasm is so necessary at the start, and then the ruthless pragmatism comes along when you get a bit bigger and start making decisions. But you're talking about your growth, and I know you've had really successful growth in the UK, but all founders by definition are optimistic. Otherwise, you wouldn't start a business if you didn't have a certain degree of optimism about how it might play out, which generally also means that all founders at some point possibly make a mistake or go, well, that's going to be X, Y, Z, and it turns out to be not quite what they anticipated, or a lot trickier. And we've all done it, and we've all kind of recalibrated, changed direction, learned the lesson. So I know you dabbled in the US, but are there
yeah.
any instances for people listening where you've kind of that natural enthusiasm and optimism has carried you a little bit too far, and you've had to pull back and go, okay, that didn't quite go to plan, and we need to get back to basics now.
No, absolutely. A few times, yeah, you mentioned the US. Um, so, yeah, post 2020, we had a kind of strong 2021, a phenomenal 2022. So entering 2023, full of confidence, and I guess, coming from the B2B events world, there are certain things that, as part of the growth trajectory, that you assume you have to do. And this very annoying term that we use called geocloning is it's one of them. You have secured that leadership spot within local market. The next thing you do is, US or other, European capitals. So I invested heavily entering 2023. We opened an office in the US, hired people based out of the US. Um, and that's exactly when the market started cooling off. That the era of cheap money was coming to an end. And because my clients are essentially backed by PE VCs, that that money tap was starting to run dry. So the markets didn't respond well to our ambitions. And yeah, 23 and 23 in particular was a very tough year for us. We matured a lot, and learned some really tough lessons. Around, it wasn't necessarily, the planning was decent, and execution was okay when I look back, but we didn't take into account some very important kind of macro trends, especially in a sector like ours, the sectors that we're involved with, fin on one hand and tech on the other. Those two sectors respond extremely rapidly
Yeah.
to bubbles, as we're probably experiencing one now, but
Exactly.
equally
Yeah. But
corrections.
all economic and geopolitical events, they tend to react very quickly in order to manage the risk. So yeah, but then hindsight's always 2020. But you talk about you learned some tough, painful lessons. And a few episodes ago, I was interviewing Sophie Bruce, the founder of Molo, who was a trained psychologist whose job was to teach resilience and to teach teams how to build resilience. And then she said when she started her business, she was thinking to herself, I'm an expert in resilience, and was completely unprepared for the amount of resilience that's required as a founder, even when things are going well. So how do you cope with that kind of mental stress and exhaustion and also a huge amount of rejection you get when you're starting out? And how do you get your team to deal with it? What are some of the things that you do to help you through that?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do tell friends and family that I have kind of two superpowers. I am average or below average on 98% of things. I'm okay at sales. I love selling, and that really is my real passion. Um, but not just selling for the sake of selling to create value and build strong relationships, and doing it properly, of course. So I'm below average at 98% of things. I'm decent at sales. However, I have two superpowers. The first one is that I'm a fantastic sleeper. I sleep extremely well. I can clock 8 hours per night, easy peasy. And I do have people around me that struggle to sleep, and I know how much of an impact lack of
Yeah, I'm
sleep
very
can.
jealous. I can't remember the last time I slept 8 hours.
I sleep like a baby. I've just nailed that aspect of life, recovery, what have you. And then the second is that I'm bloody resilient. It takes a lot for me to put me down. Um, Obviously, you get upset about things, and I'll tell you a quick story as to when I actually discover that superpower. On my very first year at VC Innovations, when we started, I got really close to a sizable deal with a major bank. Um, Understood the business case, had the speaking to the right people, um, product, their objectives, everything aligned really well. Built a really good relationship with the decision maker, and that went on for a couple of months. And that was before the Finastra, before the Finastra deal. And that deal would have equally be a complete game changer. Um, and I remember receiving the email with the start of a rejection email. They
Yeah,
all kind
yeah.
of sound the
We've had
same.
lots of internal discussions, and unfortunately,
Yeah,
right now, and
yeah,
you've got that sinking feeling in your stomach, and yeah, head starting to drop.
something
Yeah,
something along those lines. But that one was, obviously we get rejected all the time, but that one in particular, there was a lot of emotional, you know, um, energy attached to it. So I remember, and I was feeling poorly as well. I wasn't having a good, wasn't a good week health wise. I remember the email landing. I read it. Oh, that feeling. And then I remember exactly within those kind of the next minute or two. It's really, really strange. I could almost see how my mind and my body were shifting from sadness to let's go again type of
Yeah.
mode. And I cherished it. And I cherish remembering that and thinking, often I know I'm capable of shifting gears. That has happened. What's ahead? So resilience, so sleeping and resilience, those are my two superpowers.
I think
Uh,
resilience is so important, especially with rejection. I mean, like we've been going 10 years. We had like a team of over 100 offices around the world, like, well into eight figures of annual recurring revenue. And it wasn't a particularly big deal, but it was a deal where it had 6 or 7 years before I'd had a moment like that. And so I'd refused to hand it over to anyone, and I'd been like working on this little thing. And because of the time difference, because in Australia at the time, I got an email from the US that I got in the morning as I was walking out the door to go to work. And I can still remember to this day the music I was listening to and kind of like skipping up the street to the bus. I don't know what anyone else thought, because I was so delighted at this relatively small deal that had finally come to fruition. So yeah, there's the flip side as well. But you talk about your superpowers, you talk about your sales skills, and obviously, resilience, being able to get some rest and being able to sell, absolutely fundamental for being a successful founder. But there's a whole heap of other skills that are required, some of which nowadays you can outsource. You can use Gen AI if you want to, but there's also quite a lot of skills that you can't afford to outsource. So how did you deal with that when you first started? Did you self-teach and go, okay, well, I've never done this and I've never done this, but how hard can it be? Which, a lot of us do. As you say at the start, blind ignorance can get you a long way sometimes. Or did you self-teach, or did you bring in people with very specific skill sets like, CFOs or COOs, or people with those skills, to help you?
yeah. So I have a technical, like a STEM-based education. So my maths are actually, um, despite my kind of dyslexia and the attention span of a goldfish, I have a solid sort of maths foundation. So that was actually looking back, I've always fully understood cash position. I understood, I had some strong kind of projections in place. So kind of financially, I I never obviously there were dangerous kind of moments, especially on the I mentioned my wife having to take a personal loan to see us through the first one. Um, so I got away with quite a lot at the beginning. Most recently, I started working with a fractional CFO, and that has
Okay.
been phenomenal.
Okay.
Um, especially as we now, we now prepare for our real like a real growth phase. Um, I don't see us as a startup anymore. We are now a scale up. I think it's a different level, of the game. Um, so working with a fractional CFO to, really understand the intricacies of a 3-year plan, someone that understands accounting governance, which I think you can overlook the importance of accounting governance,
Yeah.
because you're thinking about product, you're thinking about sales, you're thinking about relationships, really thinking about that side of things. So yeah, look, I think we are at a phase now that we can afford that type of advisory. Um, if I could go back, I would have probably invested in just that much earlier.
Yeah, because it's
So
so it's so essential. Particularly as a founder, when you're you're running around, you're selling, you're creating products, you're building brands, you're growing the business, you're charging around like a headless chicken. Even if you keep an eye on cash, it's so hard to know, to constantly have that accounting governance, that cash flow governance, what's coming down the line. I remember one CFO I interviewed who was with me for 5 years, and I said, look, how do you see your job? And they said, my job is to keep the lights on. And I was like, that's it. That's what I need. I need someone back at the office just keeping the lights on while I'm
Exactly.
running around like a headless chicken, charging out. But you mentioned scaling, and it's super exciting to be in this stage now. If you're a scale up, not a startup. What are for any other founders listening who are at a similar stage or looking to get to a certain stage, what are some of the considerations other than really great financial governance that you need to be thinking through as you start to scale? Is it getting mentors on board? Is it different strategies? Is it slightly upgrading the team or alternate, changing people in and out of the team? What are some of the things that you should be thinking about as you start to move from startup to scale up?
Listening to your question, the first thing that comes to mind is people. I'm we talked about this in the past. I'm going through this process of shifting from working for the business to working on the business. And if you don't have good people alongside you to pick up some of those tasks and things that you so passionate about, sales being one of them, as mentioned, then that scaling journey is going to be much harder, right? It's going to be much harder to accomplish. So for me, as I continue to focus on this new phase, for me it's all about identifying, well, I have identified key people in the business um, that I trust, that have that discipline and understand where the business is going. And I think with that comes remuneration, and it comes I think what is the term, skin in the game. And I think you need to be open to consider that despite the, again, the um, what we are experiencing right now in terms of the state of the economy, the status of the economy. The market is very competitive out there, especially in B2B media and events, extremely competitive. So, when I look at our team members now, I do have people that have been with us for 3.5, 4 years, high performers. So key priority is to ensure that those team members feel valued, are well remunerated, understand the growth trajectory, and more importantly, have a very clear view as to what is in it for them in the next 2 to 3 years. So a big focus on people for us.
And that's so
Because,
key because, as you say, so many businesses get stuck because the founder just carries on working in the business. They get stuck at between 12 and 20 people roughly, and you can only do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So unless you step back and start working on the business and hand over parts of in the business and being at the coalface to your key team members, that scale growth can't come. But a hugely exciting time. You've mentioned your flagship event, the FTT conference, which I know is coming up soon. So 90 seconds. What is it? Why are you so passionate about it? What excites you most about it?
yeah, absolutely. Well, the FTT FinTech Festival is our baby. We started with the FTT FinTech Festival, and a few years on, it is the largest and the most prominent fintech conference in the UK market. For delegates attending on the 10th and 11th of November at the brewery, they're going to be enjoying 9 different stages of content. So we cover some really interesting kind of trends, innovation trends within the industry. We have a 2-day stage dedicated to all things payments and embedded finance. We have a 2-day stage dedicated to the mutual sector, so building societies, credit unions, friendly societies, which in terms of kind of innovation and digital transformation is a layer of the market that's, it's really focusing on that now and, over the next few years. So we do 39 out of the 43 building societies in the UK participate. Then we have under a different portfolio of conferences, which is Future Identity, the Future Identity Festival, which is co-located with the FTC FinTech Festival. Within that track, if you like, all things fraud, financial crime, digital identity. There is a new stage this year, a launch product called FID IAM, dedicated to identity and access management. So all things identity management, especially in the context of agentic e-commerce and agentic AI. So how are known human identities communicating with one another and corporations. So I'm very excited about that. And it's a fun, Charles. It's a fun event. We don't
It's a fun
run
event.
it.
That's what you need to know. It's got to be fun. Fun and
Exactly.
informative, and huge kudos, because you say B2B media is competitive, but the area of B2B media that's most competitive over the last 5 years has to be fintech. It's insane the amount of newsletters, publications, events, conferences, dinners around fintech. So to establish the #1 fintech show is an amazing achievement. So well done. We're almost out of time, so I just got one final quick question. So you can go back in time. You've got a time machine. You can go back to 2019, the day before you launched VC Innovations, and you can talk to yourself. And we all know that none of us would listen to our future selves in those days. But either way, you can talk to yourself. What's the one thing you would tell yourself that you didn't know at the time, that you wish you had known, that would have helped your growth, made it easier, got you through tough? What's the one piece of advice you'd give your 2019 self just before they start on this amazing journey?
Do not try to run a B2B conference in financial services at the Print Works in Bermondsey on a on a irrelevant operational budget. That's a huge mistake. I'm not sure if you know the Print Works. It's
I've been there once, I think.
Okay. So that was my year one venue. With a fraction of the budget that we have now. Bad idea. The Print Works ops team forgot to turn on the heating the night before. They forgot to turn on the heating the night before. And I still have clients that remind me of that to this date. So basically I had early November, absolutely freezing. When we were running a conference at Printworks with no heating whatsoever, and that heating actually cost me £20,000. I paid an extra 20K for them to turn the heating on, and yes, it was an absolute disaster. So that if that would be
I think that's the
my
lesson
piece of
for all
advice.
founders, that however well you plan anything, there's always that curveball that's going to come in at some point. I had a ship hired for a client event, literally a ship in Sydney Harbour hired for a client event, crash and practically sink right in front of the Harbour Bridge just as the event was about to start. And you're just there going, I actually don't know what to do now. Like, this is so catastrophically unprecedented and unplanned for. But Victor, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. All the best as you scale up. And thank you so much for sharing your stories. And we look forward to talking again soon.
Lovely. Thanks, Charles. And thanks everyone for listening to the podcast.
For all our listeners, if you'd like to hear more podcasts on how to bootstrap, or if you want to access all our bootstrapping resources and playbooks, then just go to our website, www.bootstrapconfidential.com, for free registration.